So we do want to hear from you all before we close, how the jets impact you, what you'd like our organizations to do, ideas for expanding our base, creative art projects that you think that you'd love to get involved with. So we'd also really like to know where you're from. So as we're getting started right now, we want to invite you to enter your name and where you live in the chat box so we can see who's here and where you're from. I live in Coopville, and that's right under one of the two Growler flight patterns out the outlying field near Coopville. My background's in higher education. I'm a lifelong learner. It's at my core. And I've been concerned about the impact of the F-18s, the Growlers, on all residents in our region, as well as all the living creatures in the sea and the air and the land. One of the ways that I address my concern is through learning and action. Thus, I've gotten involved with the Sound Defense Alliance. The Sound Defense Alliance is a coalition of groups and individuals that have come together to restore the balance between community and military priorities across the Pacific Northwest. The mission of the Alliance is simple. It's to work to defend our communities and our natural environments from the harmful impacts of military activity around the Salish Sea, Puget Sound, and the Olympic Peninsula. As many of you know this history, in 2018, the Department of Defense announced its decision to expand the Navy Growler F-18 jet program and electronic warfare training over the region fourfold from 6,100 operations, or FCLPs, field carrier landing practices, to 24,000. That was 6,100 to 24,000 each year. In making this decision, the military leadership ignored the objections of citizens and organizations, elected officials, and public agencies. Over 4,000 comments were submitted in response to the draft environmental impact statement. Impacts, as we know, include deafening noise, poisoned air, land, and water, as well as economic and housing impacts, and harm to marine, air, and land species, some of which are threatened or endangered. So we're in this fight for the long haul. Our foci are threefold. First, but equal, these are all equal in importance. The first is to build political power by expanding our base, our visibility, our membership. Second, to promote legislative action by deepening our relationships with elected officials and being included at the table. And third, to build our organizational capacity. At this point, I'd like to turn the gathering over to Larry Morrell from Port Townsend, who will speak on the Growler expansion and its impacts. Larry.
Thank you, Ann. Hope you all can hear me. I've got slides up. I'm sharing now. As Ann said, I'm Larry. I live in Port Townsend, and I have been involved with the Growlers for the last probably 4 or 5 years. My background is I'm a private pilot. I'm a ham operator. I have a background as an electrical engineer, so I understand some of the issues that the pilots are dealing with and what they do when they are training. I also understand what the impacts would be, and that's what I'm going to be describing mostly from an impact of the additional jets that we've been experiencing here recently. In Port Townsend, there's several places that have impacts from the jets. The folks live over on Morgan Hill. We'll no doubt hear them from Whidbey Island when they're doing field carrier landing practice. Folks who live along the coast will hear them when they're flying to and from their other training areas. So I'll go over some of this as we move on here. So first of all, what this decision of the Navy did was added 36 jets. 36 doesn't sound like very much. However, what they did is establish 2 new squadrons, expeditionary squadrons, with 10 jets went there. So 2 new sets of pilots need to be trained. And more importantly, they added 18 aircraft to the existing VAQ squadrons. These squadrons are the ones that go out and land on aircraft carriers. And I'll show you some impacts of that in a minute. And they augmented the Fleet Replacement Squadron, and the Fleet Replacement Squadron are the permanent folks stationed at Whidbey Island. They're trainers, they're the expert pilots, the signal landing officers. the folks that basically train the pilots to go out and land on aircraft carriers. So there's 3 different types of training that the pilots do, and there's 3 different kinds of squadrons. The first one, squadrons, the VAQ, they are qualified to land on carriers. The big change there is they went from 5 jets to squadrons per squadron to 7 jets per squadron. That means every time one of these squadrons is being deployed to an aircraft carrier, instead of 5 crews and jets being qualified, they have to qualify 7. So that's a 40% increase in the amount of flights and the amount of training that these folks have to go through in order to get qualified to land on carriers. They also have to go through airmanship training and electronic warfare training, just like the rest of the squadrons do, in addition to the aircraft carrier landing. The 2 new expeditionary squadrons basically doubles the number of expeditionary squadrons they had before. They've gone now to a total of 20, 4 squadrons with 5 jets each. And they practice airmanship and electronic warfare. The field replacement squadron now comprises 25 jets, and they do all 3. Since these are the experts teaching other pilots how to land on carriers, they do a lot of carrier practice themselves to stay on top of their game. So this is the training matrix that these folks deal with and that we're dealing with now. What that means, I'm going to show you now this is an air chart. This is called a sectional chart that pilots use to determine where they can fly, where they can't fly, and what some of the rules are when they have to fly. So shown here is the Olympic Peninsula, and on one end of this arrow is Alt Field, where Navy Air Station Whidbey Island resides. And then in orange outline, you'll see these are military operating areas. These are the places where the aircraft do a lot of training, including outlying field near Coopville. Now, most of the time on the Olympic Peninsula, we hear them when they're doing this training, but mostly on the east side of the peninsula. So folks on, like I mentioned before, probably Discovery Bay and Morgan Hill and the east side up and down the coastline will hear this practice. And it's deafening, and it goes on, for hours at a time. But most of the folks will see these aircraft going from Alt Field out over to the Olympic Peninsula to this military operating area. And it's if you just flew along the coastline and bothered as few people as possible, it's 92 nautical miles from one point to another until you get to the operating room, or the operating area. So what they do, though, is they don't fly direct. They don't fly this indirect route. What they do is they fly more directly. So if the direct route, and they do this all the time when they're flying home, and this is where we hear most of the noise over the Olympic National Park, is it's 72 nautical miles to go from the MOA back to Alt Field versus 92 nautical miles. So that's a difference of 20 miles. And so the Navy says this is a shortcut we do to save time. Well, 20 nautical miles at 350 knots is covered in 3 minutes and 25 seconds. So for the sake of 3 minutes and 25 seconds, they're flying over the Olympic National Park and Olympic National Forest and the folks who live in the Sequim and other places between the operating area and Alt Field. So that's what they do. What I'm going to mention now is what the impacts are based on the current tactical situation. So the Navy has 10 tactical aircraft carriers that can handle EA-18Gs. The Gerald R. Ford is not a tactical carrier yet. It's the new class, and so it's out for sea trials. The Nimitz is now active, and it has one of the squadrons from the air station attached to it right now. The VAQ-130 is aboard the Nimitz. And then the other one is Ronald Reagan. The Ronald Reagan has an aircraft carrier, group, and they have Growlers from Japan. So those folks aren't even based on Whidbey Island. So, and the USS America is a small aircraft carrier that doesn't have any large jets on it. So basically the Nimitz is the only carrier that has Growlers on it right now, which means that there are 9 carrier groups that could be equipped with Growlers if we got into the real fighting war. Now, most of the carriers are in for maintenance right now, and so the Nimitz is the only carrier from the States that is currently deployed. What that means, though, is that when we decide to go flex our muscles in the South China Sea or bump up against Russia or whatever, we're going to be deploying more aircraft carriers, which means more squadrons. So the 10 carriers active, only 2 are deployed now. And I mentioned before, the Ronald Reagan has a Japanese-based Growler squadron, and the Nimitz is the only one that has a squadron from Whidbey Island. So the takeaway is when more squadrons are going to be deployed, they're going to do this carrier landing, they're going to do electronic warfare practice, they're going to do airmanship practice even more. So the future, you can see, is going to get even noisier than we have in past experience in the past. So that's just kind of a broad brush overview. I'm not going to turn it over to Rob Smith, who's the director of the Northwest Region for the National Parks Conservation Society Association, and he's going to describe specifically what happens in the Olympic Peninsula from the standpoint of the parks. So Rob, take it away.
Great, thank you. Let me tee this up here. There we go. I'm Rob Smith, National Parks Conservation Association. I'm the Northwest Regional Director, so I'm based in Seattle. I usually don't hear Growler jets or anything like it where I am unless the Blue Angels show up. And then we hear it for several days. So we get a little bit of a taste of it. And even inside an office building in downtown Seattle, it's deafening. And I've also been out to Whidbey and out to the Olympics, so got a taste of it there too. So familiar with that. NPCA is a national group, more than 100 years old, a citizen nonprofit group that tries to protect our national park system. And we thought places like that should be protected and were, but as we've learned, there are always these new threats. But let's start with what we're trying to protect here, which is Olympic National Park. This is what we're for, really. So before we get into the threat, let's talk about what's there. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it. This is one of Teddy Roosevelt's first uses of the Antiquities Act to create national monuments, which presidents have the power to do, beginning with Mount Olympus. And that was a smaller area. It's later expanded to be very close to the Olympic National Park that we know now. Later on, there were some additions to it in later years along the Wilderness Coast. It's also been internationally recognized as a biosphere reserve and also a World Heritage Site. And in 1988, almost all of it was declared by Congress to be a wilderness, to keep it in its natural condition forever. It's also one of the most popular parks in the country. It's certainly the most popular one in the Northwest at more than 3 million visitors. So this is a special place, and a lot of people use it as not a blank spot on the map. One of the most special places is the Hoh Rainforest. And if you've been over there and spend a little time walking around, you'll recognize it as one of the special qualities of being very quiet. Because it is remote, because it is covered with vegetation, including a lot of moss, it is really nature's sound chamber. It's one of the quietest places in the country. In fact, called the most acoustically diverse and least noise polluted place in the contiguous United States by Gordon Hampton, who is a sound ecologist that lives not far from Port Townsend. He's done a lot of work out there. This will just kind of place it. You know where it is, the Hoh. Go past Forks, keep going. It is at the foot of the west side of the Olympic Mountains. And it's pretty far removed from places like Seattle in the upper right-hand corner, Skagit Valley in the upper left, or Victoria, BC over kind of the center left. So you would think that it would be, remain in its natural condition, but it's also, as Larry said, not very far from Naval Air Station Whidbey Island above the red. And where they're flying to, their dedicated airspace for military use is the Olympic Military Operations Area outlined here. So you can see that the Hoh Visitor Center actually is right on the edge of that. And here's what's making the noise. And you can see that it's not all that far to the mountains from where they are. The Naval Air Station, especially with the Growler jets, is a very noisy neighbor, and they go over there a lot. More than 5,000 exits and entries, so 2,500 flights, round trips, into the Olympic Military Operations Area. A lot of the jets do carrier practice on Whidbey Island. Many of us experienced some of that, but not all of them do that. But every single one of the Growlers goes over and does electronic warfare training in the Olympic MOA. Here's, as a result of litigation, after some Freedom of Information Act requests finally went to court, got information that is a few years old. Back in 2016, the FAA, at the request, I believe, of Congressman Kilmer, actually did a study of, well, where are the flights going and what altitude and where do they come from? They looked at commercial, private, and military flights. This is just a pulling out the piece that's military flights. You can see that thing that looks like kind of a red pretzel in the upper right-hand corner is Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, and you can see the different approaches to it. The red is lower elevation, so that would be landing or takeoff. And then you can see how they concentrate into what looks like that blue line on their way out to the Olympic airspace, which is outlined in the orange on the west side of the Olympic Peninsula. So they're fairly concentrated there. They're at a little bit higher elevation. But on their way back, they're coming from all over the place. And you can see that sort of fan of colors that are lower elevation and all heading towards that one spot that's not too far from Squim, it looks like. But they're coming all over the place in the Olympics. So it's very hard to go to Olympic National Park, this special place, and find some respite from the jets, because it's as if the park wasn't there. Specifically, let's look at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center, indicated by the arrow there. And you can see just this mishmash of flight tracks over there at all different kinds of elevations. Clearly, no one is avoiding the park or this particular quietest place. You can see that kind of angled orange line from the upper left, kind of the middle, down the middle of the slide, is an indicator of west of there to the left is the operations area. And you can see there are all kinds of lines going back in there. But of course, the noise, they're going right up to the boundary. And of course, the noise goes out about 5 or 6 miles in each direction. And then, of course, they're returning on those multicolored flight paths right over the Hoh. More recently, there was a study done by some University of Washington researchers that looked at, there's even more noise by military aircraft out there than the FAA calculated. The FAA said, well, about 66% of the flights in this area are military. In fact, by actually measuring it throughout a year's worth of sampling, 88% were, and thousands of events. And in fact, some days, and these would be weekdays that they were out there typically, you could hear it 40% or more of the time, up to 100 times, because each plane may come past you more than once as they circle around and do their maneuvers. And the sound is up to more than 80 decibels when the background is normally in the low 30s. And when you go up 10 decibels, you double the sound. So that's actually going in that range is about 32 times louder than natural background. The difference is between a whisper, and according to the Navy's own chart, they equate it to a sound of a garbage disposal flying overhead. I've gone out there with my own little cell phone app, you just download for free and listen, and found that in the kind of low 70s decibel range in one passover at the Hoh, it was actually the same as when I went out on the sidewalk during Seattle during rush hour downtown on a weekday. So I think when we plan to go all the way out to the Olympics into the Hoh Rainforest, we expect to escape the sounds of downtown Seattle at rush hour. To bring it down more personally, this actually, all these numbers and large numbers, it all kind of comes down to individual experience. Here's one. Chuck Nelson is an Army veteran, and part of his recovery from the trauma of war is going to a quiet place, a natural place, and be surrounded by nature. And he's found the west side of the Olympics. And he's not alone. A number of other people live out there or go out there with this in mind, and a number of them go out with him. And of course, exactly what he does not need to hear is the sound of warplanes going overhead suddenly and unpredictably. So he is one of the military vets that are saying, I'm all for the training. We get that. I have a son in the Army myself. Training's important, but so are national parks, which are the things that we're fighting for. Are there alternatives? Yes, and the Navy has used them. There's Naval Air Station Whidbey Island in the upper part, 400 miles away as the jet flies is Mountain Home Air Force Base just past Boise, Idaho. They, in fact, were training down there for a while, and they could do that again. The Navy says, well, that would take time, although it's less than an hour each way, and it would cost $5 million a year, which is nice of them to be cost conscious, but each Growler jet is on or more or less about $70 million a year. And as Larry indicated, they are bringing more there to bring the fleet up to 113 of them. So money is not a problem here. For more than the cost of one Growler jet, or for less than that, you could certainly solve this problem for several years by simply going elsewhere. And that's just one option. There are several other bases all around the country, around the world, as a matter of fact, where this sort of training could happen. So this is really a matter of convenience for the Navy. They like to, understandably, be close to their base, be close to their other ships, but it's not the only way they can do this. There has been some progress made, thanks to noise that you have made as citizens. That's beginning to be heard. Some of the players here, Representative Derek Kilmer represents the Olympic Peninsula. And although there's a big Navy base and presence in Bremerton, they build ships, they don't fly airplanes. He also has Olympic National Park. And so he's on the Appropriations Committee. So his phone calls will get answered if he calls the Navy, because that's where the money comes from. Likewise, Senator Maria Cantwell is on the Natural Resource Committee, which oversees the parks, and the Commerce Committee, which oversees the FAA, which controls the airspace. She has really stepped up to try to push the Navy to do actually measure the sound. The Navy has actually never gone out there with noise monitoring and said, here's what it really sounds like in these places. They have used models and projections, and which may or may not be accurate, but they can certainly be tinkered with, and different assumptions can be put into them. But no one's actually measured the sound, including in as many places that the sound can actually be heard. We've been urging them to push the Navy, and they did, for this last year, to initiate for the first time a noise study of actually measuring the sound, and they'll do that over the course of the next 12 months. Representative Rick Larson represents Whidbey Island as well as the San Juans and places like Bellingham, Anacortes. He is also on the Armed Services and the Transportation Committees, so obviously his phone calls would get returned. So we have some very powerful and well-placed people on the delegation that represent the parks and the people and places that we are concerned about. And it's we need all of us to remind them of what's really important here. The Navy has choices, but we don't have choices of where we live and where these special places are. Also, I should mention that Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson sued the Navy last year, and you'll hear a little more about litigation later. So state of Washington versus the Navy. This is about operations at Whidbey Island and how the Navy has not done an adequate job of considering wildlife and human health and historic preservation. So it's taken a while to get this level of attention. More needs to be done, but all the efforts that everyone has made to bring this to their attention and ask for them to do something is starting to pay off. They are paying attention to the Navy, and the Navy is starting to hear it. And then just to wrap up, we have a campaign at MPCA called Hear Our Olympics, including a little 8-minute video on this as well, which touches on a number of these things. So if you want to hear more and see how you can help with what we're doing, there you've got the website, mpca.org/hearourolympics. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Chris or Maryon, whoever is teed up to go next.
Chris is available now.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Okay, I'm Chris Hurley, and I'm now going to share my screen, which will take all of my focus, I'm certain.
No, I can't
Let me
hear it.
find it.
It's the effect to the people at the other end. I think they have their volume turned very low.
Going to find it.
Ask people, please, who are participating to please mute your microphone. There'll be time later to ask questions and make comments.
Okay, Well, I've got up on your screen now a very, very quick and simple review. I'm Chris Hurley. I'm a SDA volunteer. I live in Coopville, and I'm working with Lauren Keeney, who was the person who authored the study that Rob was referring to earlier about measuring noise out on the Olympic Peninsula. Lauren and she's the scientist, I'm the logistics coordinator person for the project, but we're doing a noise study that attempts to really measure in real time and from multiple locations, noise related to flight operations around the outlying field in Coopville and the field up at the home base at the alt field in Oak Harbor. And I just wanted to tell you about this study because it's an ongoing piece. SDA is doing it, is responsible for it. We wanted to actually, we know that, as Rob was just describing, the Navy is now charged with doing real-time measurement for the first time of its noise. And we were curious to do a study of the noise, not exactly hoping to validate or invalidate the Navy's results, but to look at noise that we experience from a more broad perspective. One, we wanted to basically describe the noise that affects, is experienced by people who live near and around. You don't have to live right under the flight path like Anne does, but you can live a lot of places in the north part of Puget Sound and be seriously affected by the flights and noise related to the growlers. So the first is to begin to describe the noise in residential areas. And we really wanted to be able to get a better sense of that measurement and do a better kind of measurement than the Navy can do. And one thing that we've done in the past, in fact, CORE, Citizens of Beebe's Reserve, have done two very, very sophisticated studies in the past from individual spots right near the outlying field in Coopville. And those studies were very, very good ones. They measured noise at one point at one time, but they took noise over several days in each of about 9 places. There were 2 full studies. And again, the National Parks Service at Eby's Landing did another good study using separate techniques and very sophisticated pieces of equipment. And in fact, the Bureau of Land Management has done a separate study measuring noise at Point Colville. That study has actually not been analyzed. The data has been collected but not analyzed. So there's been a lot of information that's gathered, but we wanted to do something different with it. We wanted to get a better sense of just how frequently the noise occurs, how frequently are flights overhead. We don't talk about that very often. We talk about, we've had a reading of 119 decibels at the Rubel Farm, but we don't know much else. We want to be able to describe the frequency of flights, because that is a big feature of the noise, how often it happens. We wanted to be able to say describe the noise that is above a certain level, in terms of literally saying, well, this is how often the noise is above 90 decibels or above 100 or above 110. And to just count that frequency, not to be able to say we have a high reading, but to say among all the flights, how often are we getting to really serious noise? We know that hearing damage begins at 80 decibels and the frequency of the exposure is at 80 decibels. The number of times you are exposed to that begins to accumulate in terms of hearing damage. So we're looking at how often is it painful, disturbing, and harmful noise. And we also wanted to say, what does the noise sound like from the same plane in different places? We have, in the past, our measurements have been at one place and one measurement at a time. But we have put up multiple sites so we'll know when a plane is on flight path 14, here's how far you can hear it. You can hear it in Port Townsend, you might hear it on Camino, and you'll hear decibel levels of that. But over down in Green Bank or Ledgewood, you can hear it at this level. So we haven't done that kind of thinking and recording about noise. And you all know that you are not directly under flight paths, but you are under perhaps transit points, and you know that sometimes it's low and sometimes it's high, so you know the noise is different. So that we wanted to get a better sense, a better kind of measurement than the noise that the Navy may be capturing. And very importantly, the Navy has said in its environmental impact statement that basically the noise and the exposures we're exposed to are not significant. The Department of Health in Washington State asked the Navy, after they looked at the draft EIS, to do a health impact assessment. The Navy chose not to. We are interested in actually understanding a lot about the noise exposures we live with, and comparing that with the studies that have been done in the world of comparable noise. And the Navy had basically said, we don't, the impacts are negligible, not of serious impact, but we know that the level of exposures that people live with, particularly under the flight path, are not common. In fact, the studies that have been done, there's really only one good study that we have found among all international research that has comparable noise. And that's related to a study done on the community on Okinawa in Japan, where there's military bases and a lot of flights. They have done a good assessment of health impacts. We do not have the capacity right now to do health impacts, but we are interested to compare our exposures to the exposures in the other studies that have been done of noise of that level. So that's a big one. We're trying to take all the results that have been amassed among all the studies and be able to compare it to what's known in the research out in the world. And not a lot is known, I should add, but we are going to try to benchmark ourselves to the existing literature. And the last point that I want to make is we're not doing this really to validate the Navy's monitoring accuracy. Not because we're not curious about that, but because we have no capacity to imitate or match the Navy's monitoring sophistication. The level of equipment that they will be working with is vastly beyond our capacity. We are using relatively simple acoustic monitors and some sound pressure monitoring. And that's not our point, is to match them. We actually want to know about the noise in a different way. So it will be interesting to see how we compare, but that's really not our objective because it's not a fair fight. They have much better tools. And the last thing I'll mention is that this is our monitoring. So we have 12 monitoring sites. We have 6 sites that are connected loosely to the outlying field. And they're not just in Coopville, they're over into Port Townsend, over to Camino, down south to about 5 or 6 miles south of the runway, and also north. And we have 6 sites around Altfield. And again, we're going to be going up to the tip of Lopez, Fidalgo, and throughout north central for the Altfield. So I'll show you, just because it's always interesting to see how the Navy maps sound. This is just related to the flight operations, the training, touch and go training flights. So it doesn't cover all the electronic warfare training that's done in your neck of the Olympic Peninsula. This is just how the Navy describes noise related to touch and go practice on Whidbey. And you'll often be, many people are impressed if the outer purple lines are how they describe the edge of the noise impact areas. And the red lines are the more serious noise. But what you'll notice is it's pretty small, relatively speaking. What we'll be seeing more clearly with our data is what those operations really look like in terms of real noise. These are the average noise measurements that you probably have heard about that the Navy uses, which is 1 occurrence in a day is averaged over 24 hours, and suddenly it doesn't look so loud. So, so that's the study that we are doing. We are in process. We've had a lot of delay on our study because we literally got started in the beginning of July. We wanted to be able to capture 2 weeks of data around from sites around OLF and 2 weeks of good data from sites around ALT. And we have been stymied by strange, coincidental, long periods of no scheduled FCLPs. We had 5 weeks this summer. We are now in a 4-week hiatus around ALT field. And so we're proceeding slowly, but hopefully we'll be accurate and interesting by the time we're done. I'll be happy to answer your questions later on when we're done with everybody's presentation. And I am now going to pass you along to Maryon Attwood, who's going to do the next section of our presentation. Now unshare.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
You're welcome, Maryon.
I'm Maryon Attwood, and before I get going, Anne wants me to remind people to put your questions in the chat box if you have any from these excellent presentations. Thank you, Rob. That was such a great presentation. Those blue lines really show that shortcut. I was so impressed with that. So I'm a small business owner who owns a business in Coupeville. My ex-husband was a Navy pilot. I have been involved with agricultural activities here on Whidbey Island and helped create the Organic Farm School and the Whidbey Island Grown brand. And one of my children has just moved here from Spokane, so I have grandchildren here. So this is home for me, and I have been engaged in fighting for my home environment. So as a result, I have become the chair of the Sound Defense Alliance Legislative Committee, and we are one of the committees for the Sound Defense Alliance. And I think you get a sense of the power of this coalition and bringing together the people who live in Northwest Washington and building our power base has been a really important thing. As you saw with Rob's presentation with Senator Cantwell and Representative Larson and Representative Kilmer. I just want to point out that, you know, we have been deepening and strengthening our connections to all of our elected officials, not just our congressional delegation. So those of you who, you know, you live and work and probably see these folks in the grocery store, but your representatives, Kevin Vandeweghe, Mike Chapman, Steve Theringer, Michelle Sandoval, what's John's name? John Morrow, the Port Townsend city manager, and Kate Dean, who's one of the commissioners for Jefferson County. These people are all people that can be helpful to us because their support in writing to our congressional delegation has really helped get our message heard in Washington, D.C. and by the U.S. Navy. In fact, it even resulted in the Secretary of the Navy coming to visit Whidbey Island to talk about what was happening here. So we are getting noticed, and our first campaign was we hear you, do they hear us? And they are definitely getting the message. And we have a couple of other action things that Anne will mention at the end that you can do to take action for yourself. So back to one of the primary thing that our committee does is monitor, one of the things that we do is monitor state legislation, which advocates for the public and for public processes that include community goals equally alongside military goals in our state. And this was actually one of the coalescing activities that Sound Defense Alliance took at the beginning. We did a blitzkrieg action on a bill that was submitted by military supporters in Olympia that would have given base commanders control over local land use planning. And so with our allies, we were able to kill that bill. And that is one of the things that we serve to do. We also create help create the strategies and the outgoing communications to our legislative electives at all levels, local level, up to our state, and into the federal government. And there's a list of a number of the letters or a series of documents that we posted on our website, Sound Defense Alliance's website, for you to take a look at. These are letters that we have written this past year in regards to the National Defense Authorization Act. And some of these representatives that I've just mentioned, your representatives, and others throughout our region have received these letters. So if you'd like to see what we've done and the kind of communications we've been making with these folks, they're on our website, and feel free to go and take a look at those. As Rob mentioned, we are focusing on the National Defense Authorization Act and making the Navy do real-time noise monitoring. They don't want to do this. They've dragged their feet this year, and we've been asking for an extension in next year's NDAA. But this is the first time there has ever been legislation at the federal level to make the Navy do real-time noise monitoring. Not modeling of the noise, but real-time data that's collected from the noise that their Growlers makes. And so just for your information, I'm gonna, this is in one of our letters, but our focus right now, and you'll see this, is for noise monitoring sites and protocols. We really wanted our local electeds to be involved in this process, and SDA did submit our own list of sites, monitoring sites that we wanted. The Navy has subsequently told us that they are not going to share the sites that they have selected, and so we will be, after the federal election, the presidential election, be putting more pressure on them to share those sites that they have selected. We'd like to add locations. We'd like to have at least 20 locations for them to be monitoring. We want all raw data to be collected and to be publicly available on a regular basis. We want a wide range of noise metrics to be included in the report, the final report. And we have asked for an extension to make Congress be the boss of the Navy. You know, the Navy doesn't have to answer to us, really. They have to answer to Congress. So Congress is the boss, and we have some really great allies. Adam Smith is very familiar, Representative Smith is very familiar with noise in general, since he's right by SeaTac, and a lot of his constituents have complained about airport noise, so he knows a lot about noise. He's been very helpful to us, as has the congressional delegation, Representative Kilmer, Cantwell, and Larson. So, noise is one of those things we don't learn about in school. We know it's one of our senses, but it's been the focus for our legislative committee, the primary focus of our legislative committee. We also have created a plan, which we call the roadmap, to remove the growlers from our region and to go to one of those alternatives that Rob mentioned a little bit. But there are alternatives, and they could, and we believe should be, using those alternatives. And this little document that's up on your screen is a little document. These are some of the kinds of things that the legislative committee puts together with the help of some of our member groups. And this one is explaining the cost of what it takes for flying for an hour, how much it costs all of us for one of these growlers to fly for an hour. And this does not even include the pilots or any pilot training. This is just the cost of the aircraft. So it's a lot of money. It's, when there's going to be so many needs for us post-corona, we hope that we're going to be better about finding better ways to spend our money. So this is just a little sample of one of the items that we put together as a little poster to make things somewhat understandable. I've been listening to us, and we have a lot of complex information that we're sharing with all of you. So I wanted to remember to tell you about the legal battles that the Navy, this is one of the other good things about being a coalition, is that we have a number of citizens and groups, including the Attorney General, who have sued the Navy over this expansion of the Growler mission in Northwest Washington. They basically have overstepped their reach, and I think someone just didn't realize, maybe they had never been to Northwest Washington. They didn't know that there were people out here. So anyway, there are many lawsuits. There's a citizens lawsuit. There's the Attorney General who has sued the Navy, and Citizens of Eby's Reserve has sued the Navy, basically to redo and basically reject the final record of decision, which has put these extra 36 growlers here. And to further that end, Citizens of Eby's Reserve did submit a preliminary injunction to stop the new flights and training, and the judge has not ruled on that yet. So that all the other lawsuits, even down to the citizens' lawsuits, there's one that includes a group of people, one that includes one person, the Attorney General's lawsuit, the Corps lawsuit, those are all waiting until the judge finally makes a decision about the preliminary injunction to halt the current training by the growlers. And the mitigation or the relief would be to return the number of growler flights back to, turn the clock back to before the record of decision, to the 6,100 flights over Coupeville, and to stop the overflights of the Olympic Peninsula. So It's a big decision this judge is making, and the magistrate, some judges are very busy, and some have magistrates. And the magistrate is like a very powerful administrative assistant. They get to look at these cases and make a recommendation. They can't make a decision. That's up to the judge. But the magistrate did recommend that the judge deny the appeal for a preliminary injunction. But that was about 2 months ago. So we don't know why the delay is happening. Usually that means good news, but in this world of COVID, there's no way to actually know. So, you know, the coalition of groups and having more people involved in the efforts to challenge the Navy's expansion here is costing the Navy a lot in lots of different areas. So this is good trouble as far as I'm concerned. We're making good trouble. And we're going to continue to make good trouble no matter what happens next week. So if you're interested in this committee or being involved in helping us with strategies or being involved with our elected officials or monitoring legislation in Olympia, we'd love to know about it. So thank you. It's really great to have all of you here.
This is Brian, and before I turn it back to Ann to collect your questions, since this slide is up and there's a question about it, how do you read the chart? The chart, I believe, is available on the Sound Defense Alliance website. But just to look real quickly, what this says over here is it cost almost $98 million to purchase each jet, $98 million. And if you look at that, they fly about 9,000 hours over their service life. That comes out to almost $11,000 an hour. But that turns out buying the aircraft is a small part. This is the cost of operation and support. That includes fuel, maintenance, people, and so forth. That's another $36,000 per hour to fly it. Small amount to dispose of it at the end. So the number that we often use is anytime you see one of those Growlers flying, it's $47,000 an hour. This information is all from government documents, all public documents, and you can find it on the website. So with that, I'll hand it back to Ann.
Right. I just wanted to add one thing. Thanks, Brian, for doing that. That was helpful for folks, I'm sure. We try to document our sources wherever possible. So that's why you're seeing the documentation at the bottom. So we do try to provide that for everybody. We don't just make this stuff up. Back to Ann.
All right, it's time to hear from you all in terms of your questions. And we're going to wrap up by around 7:15. So we want to make sure we get to some of your questions as well as having a chance to hear from you about the impact of the jets on you and ideas that you may have about where we should go from here too. So starting with questions, I have not seen any in the chat, but maybe I missed them. I will do a quick scan to raise your hand if you.
And I'm not on the screen.
Got it.
Can I get in queue anyway?
You are on your phone, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you you have a question?
Yes, and I can ask it at any time.
Okay, take it away.
Oh, okay. When I was thinking about solution, I've been involved with Growlers for years, and the last couple of years not because of a family health emergency, but I'm getting back into that now since it's resolved. And I was thinking about solutions. And when you said Maryon said, no, anyway, Sound Defense Alliance was talking about lawsuits. I wondered about the possibility of a class action lawsuit. And the other the other question I had was when in 2006 to 2010, we were working here in Port Townsend against to force the paper mill to follow the law and follow the EPA guidelines. And during that time when they were refusing and denying, et cetera, our organization, our group, requested from the State Department of Public Health what is known as at that department as a community health assessment of a particular problem. And we didn't even know it existed, and they came and they did that. As a result of that, the mill had to change the way they were operating in several important areas. They did, and the quality of our air improved. So that was through the State Department of Epidemiology.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question and that inspiring story. It's always great to hear about successes in terms of taking on battles like this. Maryon, do you want to talk a little bit about class action lawsuit? Because it seems like there's one that is has been filed, and I
wanted to say something
Chris.
also about community health assessments, which point out one of the sad realities of public health and protections and other environmental health protections that are due to most citizens in the United States or residents in the United States. The hard part about the military is that our standard residential population protections do not apply to military activities. So that the Department of Health, the DOH would be a natural ally for a right place to go for an assessment. And in fact, as I mentioned, they asked the Navy, they strongly suggested that the Navy do a health assessment, but it was really up to the Navy to do it because our rules, our public civic rules don't apply to those regulations don't apply to the Navy or any military activity in the country. So we're not protected by the standard rules of environmental and other protections that of the rest of the citizenry.
Thanks, Chris. And did you want to add to that, Maryon, in terms of the class action lawsuit idea?
Right. The big class action lawsuit has to do with the loss of property value. And that's being handled by a local attorney with a big Chicago firm. And but that one is on hold as well until the preliminary injunction is ruled on.
Can we join?
No, they aren't taking anyone else at this time. There may be more down the line. So keep tuned. They may open it up to more people. Right now, they are not.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maryon. And thanks for your question. I didn't ask your name on the phone.
Aaliyah Waters.
Aaliyah. Thanks, Aaliyah. I see Julia has a suggestion and just wanted to also comment on how the jets impact her. So Julia, take it away. You can unmute. We can't hear you yet.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Julia Cochran. I live in Port Townsend. I have PTSD from a violent crime that happened many, many years ago. And a lot of what you talk about is how loud it is. But one of the ways it impacts me is, I don't have the right words, but I would say tone. That is the same sound as terror to me. That there is a sound when you are terrorized of your blood rushing in your ears. And it has a certain pitch. And I believe that pitch is the same, that they've weaponized the sound to be the sound of fear, and that's intentional. And I am not someone who usually believes in conspiracy theories. So anyway, that's part of my feeling. The other thing, my suggestion is that when I moved here, I met all sorts of mostly women who had moved to the Olympic Peninsula because they were escaping some version of violence. And there's a lot of us. And there's a lot of us with PTSD who are survivors here. And that's a whole nother lawsuit. Is that, yeah, it's a health issue. It's a mental health issue. And I can prove it. I mean, this isn't, I can totally prove it. New York State crime victims comp paid for 12 years of counseling here. And I'm back in counseling. And part of it's the Growlers. Is the increased constant reminder of what fear is. So that's it.
Thanks, Julia. And that's a really important piece in terms of acknowledging the mental health impacts, which Rob mentioned in his presentation, but it's all connected. And thank you for raising that question about pursuing that in terms of both health assessment, but also exploring ways to pursue that legally. So thank you. Ron Richards has a question regarding the noise study that was used for the biops regarding the spotted owl and the marbled murrelet. Ron.
Okay, I had to step out a minute, so maybe Rob already covered this, but those noise tracks that Rob came up with in his requests for documents are really interesting because the biop was based on a noise study that guaranteed there would be no military flights within 3 miles of the boundary of the MOA. And looking at those tracks, that's just total garbage. I mean, there was just no attempt to comply with that, or at least there has been none. If those tracks are still what are being followed, and I'm sure they are. So I was just wondering if Rob, you or your attorneys have done any work on reopening that biop on the basis of their noise assumptions just being totally erroneous.
That's a good point, and I'll have to follow up with them. I know most of the challenges so far have been around they would include the adequacy and the assumptions that went into the noise modeling generally compared to the reality of where they're really flying. And there are differences between what the Navy is projecting and portraying they're doing and what the flight tracks actually show. So that's a good point. I'll bring that up specifically with them. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Ron. So there's a question from Jutta that is about coordinated letter writing. Is there a coordinated letter writing effort to target representatives systematically? Shock and awe approach might make a greater impression. Thanks. Thank you, Jutta. Maryon, do you want to respond to that?
Well, we've used that in the past, and if you're interested in writing letters, make sure that you send us an email. And Anne, what's the Sound Defense Alliance email that she should send it to if she wants to volunteer?
It's basically our info at. Okay.
Yes.
Sound Defense
Info
Alliance.
at.
Info at sounddefensealliance.com, I believe it is. I'll double check that. If you go to the website, it will show up right away. And I don't want to give you the wrong address.
We're kind of like, we're waiting until after the federal election until we do our next big actions. So we will be doing something. So if you want to get involved, that'd be great.
Great. All right. We also have a question from Ward. Is it possible and does it do any good to write the judge in the case? Maryon, you want to respond to that too?
No, absolutely not. Do not write the judge. No, that's not done.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Pam Petronek, who is a Port Commissioner for District 1, Port Townsend, who's here as an individual, said she received a letter from the Navy to be invited to the NAS Whidbey Island Community Leadership Forum on November 17th and can provide comments and questions of interest to be included. in the agenda. The letter ends with your continued support, provides for the success of Team Whidbey, our military families, and surrounding communities. And do we have recommendations to all of our electeds and their staff in Jefferson County, including the PUD, the hospital, and the Public Health Department? Thank you, Pam. Great. Maryon, you want to say a word on that? And it sounds like we will be in touch with you, Pam, to follow up, because this is great in terms of being able to be very specific about our recommendations.
Right. That's great, Pam. We'll definitely follow that one up and provide you with some information.
You.
Do we know how to find you? Will you do the info at Sound Defense Alliance?
I sure will.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Great. Wonderful. And the last question we'll take right now, because we want to hear from a couple of other people before we wrap up. Doug Mulholland asked, what power does the state have to enforce the Washington Department of Health requests? And I think that gets back to Chris, you may want to say another word on this, but basically the reality that the state does not have the power we would like it to have in the face of the Navy. Do you have anything else to add to that, Chris?
Oh, I'm such an expert. I'm really not an expert on also the Environmental Protection Act, the NEPA law, which basically, when environmental impact statements are issued, they are issued, they're done. And so the State Department of Health urged them, advised them to conduct an assessment. They chose not to do that. I actually offered the health department, our Island County Health Department, assistance in getting help to do an assessment. But at the time, the politics were not right with the county's Board of Health to take that idea up. But once an environmental impact statement is done and a record of decision is issued, it's over. So they are not obliged. And of course, when you think about how impact statements are done, the party that wishes to create the impact issues the rule at the end. They look at the issue an impact statement, the public gets to comment on it, and ultimately the Navy gets to say, well, this is what the rule is. And so we're out of luck in terms of that.
Can I just add something to that, Anne?
Mm-hmm.
The reason that Maryon's group is working a lot with the congressman is that most laws concerning the protection of the environment and noise and so forth have specific exemptions for the military. Mm-hmm. So the military can do pretty much what it wants to. And as Maryon alluded to earlier, that's why we're talking a lot to our congressman, because Congress is the place where these rules can actually be changed. The state can make noise. The state can rally our congressional delegation, but that's the path to make this all happen is through Congress. Whether that's good or bad, that is the path that we have to follow.
Right.
This is Brian. Add to that, I have spoken with friends at the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is the largest environmental organization in the United States. They probably won more cases against the military than anyone else in the country. But when I've talked to people there, they said it's really, really hard because the courts generally defer to the government and in our case, the Department of Defense on questions of making determinations. And his recommendation was exactly what you just heard from Larry, is the only way to make changes is through your elected officials. You have to get your senators and your elected representatives to put the pressure in legislation on the Department of Defense.
Thanks, Brian. So we just have a couple more minutes, and I just want to just point out the questions that Brian has posted. We'd love to hear from you by email, so stay in touch. You all have my email. You can contact me directly, and I will share whatever responses I get from you with the rest of this team. You can also contact us through our website at Sound Defense Alliance. I would like to just conclude by, there was a question by David Winters about the Navy noise complaint line, which Chris is going to add to the chat function so that that information is available for everyone. what that phone number is, as well as our websites for the Sound Defense Alliance and the National Parks Conservation Association and Quiet Skies, which is important also in terms of being able to access their mapping project. So what can you do? Be active. So go to our websites, please, and join us. If you did not receive an invitation for today's event, that may mean we only have your email and we don't know where you live. So please go onto our website for Sound Defense Alliance and fill out the basically membership information so we can get you into the system and keep you posted. So please go onto our website, join us, join the National Parks Conservation Association, and access Quiet Skies in terms of their mapping project, which I'll get to in just a minute. Come to our websites, join our organizations, donate to Sound Defense Alliance, contact your elected officials, contact your elected officials, contact your elected officials. We will organize you around particular talking points and issues, but again, that is one of the most important ways to make a difference. And the more voices, of course, the better. So as you join and contact our websites, have your neighbors and friends and at least 3 to 5 other people, contact them, email them the website and say join. We want to continue to expand our base. Also volunteer to be a contact person for organizing in Port Townsend, in Forks, in Sequim, in Port Angeles. I know there's a lot of interest in Port Townsend. Many of you are from Port Townsend, and we'd love to get a group that is specifically a Port Townsend group. So again, you can contact us through the website, contact me directly, and let us know that you would like to get involved in helping to organize a local group. Don't forget to vote. Hopefully everyone has voted by now, or you will be dropping off your absentee ballot in the next couple days. But again, this is one, get everyone we know to make sure that they have voted. When you hear the Growlers, report on the San Juan County Jet Noise Report website. So that information is available through the Quiet Skies website, which we've got for you as well. So report on that website. That tracks locations. It's not about decibels, it's about locations. And there's a place for improvement. So if you are hearing them fly in an area that they have never flown before, or they're really low, or there's an impact on you that you've never experienced before, please report. And just do it regularly. Call or send an email to the Navy. And I think that number is being entered, if it isn't already, into our chat. So call the Navy complaint line. Just keep calling, keep calling. We know that information doesn't necessarily make any difference with the Navy. However, elected officials have been known to request that information. So it's really helpful to make those calls or send an email to the Navy. If you have further questions, further comments, we just didn't have enough time to hear from everybody today because it's such a wonderful, great group. But do stay in touch. Let us know through our website or through my email. I want to thank each of our speakers. Thanks to Larry Morrell. Thanks to Ron. Thanks to Maryon and Chris for all of your preparation and presentations. And thanks to Brian for being our Zoom moderator. And thanks to each of you for being a part of this gathering. We will do it again.
Thank you all.